Hello, and welcome to Season 2 of Fractional Futures, where in each episode, I'm chatting to a fractional leader somewhere across the globe to get their perspectives on how the fractional leadership model is being embraced by the business landscape. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Zachary King, or Zach, who operates as a fractional VP in Australia. And Zach is also founder of the Fractional Exec Community. A bit more on that later. Hi, Zach. Welcome to the show. I believe you're based in Noosa, near Brisbane on the Sunshine Coast. Is that north of Sydney?
A little bit north of Sydney, Paul. Yeah, it's mate, probably not more than 18 hours drive, so we're not too far away. That's as we measure things here in Australia.
Yeah, I think that would be a flight for us in the UK. I've not been to Noosa. I visited Sydney about 6 years ago, and I didn't get to see Brisbane. I hear it's absolutely fantastic, but I did discover the Moreton Bay bug, which was a very tasty piece of. Is it a flat-headed lobster? Isn't it?
Something like that, mate. It's a local delicacy around here, and it's sold for reasonable prices, which is great.
So, Zach, shall we just jump straight in? Really, would you like to tell the listeners a little bit about, your background before you became a fractional exec and what you're doing now?
Yeah, sure. So I started my career originally way back in the days in tech commercialization. So working with universities to take high tech research and bring that out to the world, commercialize it, bring it into an actual product. At that point, or after a couple of years of doing that, I decided that startups looked like they'd be a lot more fun. And so jumped into a little digital startup in the publishing space. It was about 15 people when we joined. We peaked at 55. We touched the sun. We didn't quite get there. News Corp was a foundational client, and I found out afterwards from the board that they had rejected an acquisition bid. But that's okay. It's just money, really. And you're in startups long enough, you get a few of those. And then I ended up working for a late-stage ad tech company out of Singapore, an outfit called MediaMath. MediaMath is in that very rarefied air of having raised $1 billion in capital and still managed to go broke. But it was after I left, and very little to do with my expense accounts in Singapore, I assure you. And when I came back to Australia, I launched a startup of my own. I thought I'd been doing it for about 10, 15 years, working for other startups. Thought I'd give it a shot of our own. So we launched a healthcare startup, Mobius, raised a little bit of money, built a product, took it to market, and unfortunately that's where it got stuck. And that was pretty much about the time I came across the fractional model.
So how did you discover the model then? Did you just stumble across it, or were you introduced to it by your network?
Yeah, look, to be honest, I can't even remember where I first came across the fractional concept. I am terminally online, or very online, as I'm referred to, as the saying goes, but I can't remember where I first came across it. But at that time, I was looking for a flexible way of working. That was the primary driver. I had 2 kids under 2 by that point, half a startup as that was winding down. I was living in Noosa, which is a surfside town. So wasn't looking at going back to jumping back into the 80-hour-a-week tech job, and was looking for something a little bit more flexible. And so, yeah, I thought I'd give the fractional exec a shot.
And when you gave it a shot, were there other people in your network? Did you know many other people doing this fractional gig, or were you kind of the pioneer?
I was a pioneer, but only in the sense that I hadn't connected with anyone yet. Obviously, it'd been around for a lot longer than just what I've been doing for, say, the last 2.5 years. But I certainly didn't know anyone who was doing it. And so my journey into the space was a fairly, trying to think of a politer word than bumbling. It was a fairly bumbling approach where I literally just threw it out to the world and said, hey, I'm doing this fractional thing. And I got a couple of clients, which is obviously great validation. And in that process, right at the very beginning, I actually worked with a couple of clients for free. I worked with 3 or 4 clients. I did a month for free to kind of test out my systems. How's this going to work? How can I actually add value? What tools do I need? What does that look like?
And when you're going through that process of, I guess, testing and learning, developing your value proposition, just honing it, were there any challenges you had to overcome, I guess, on a personal level or financial level when you transitioned into that new work style?
Yeah, look, the financial insecurity is real. And I've been doing it for a couple of years. I don't think even that's gone away yet. One of the things that's really challenging I find about fractional is it's very much performance driven. My contracts or my engagements usually start with a 3-month buy, and then after that, it tends to be month to month. And so, if you're not delivering value, then you're in trouble, and their contract can end pretty quickly. So that financial insecurity is a real thing. But yeah, that initial kind of free tests or free pilots that I did were really helpful in terms of figuring out how to split my time, how to track the work that I was doing, how to communicate with clients, and develop those systems, which are obviously, very different from when you're working completely embedded with a company from day one.
For the listeners, can you explain what your clients looked like in terms of that early stage? Were they people, were they clients that you already knew about? Was it serendipity brought you together? How did you find them?
Yeah, interesting. And the $1 million question that always comes about is, how do you find clients? And look, I can honestly say I'm still figuring this out. One of my earliest clients who ended up being one of my longest running clients, and in fact is going to come around again. We're going to do some more work shortly. I only found out about 6 months into the engagement that he had been lurking in what was the audio app that was hot for about 5 minutes out of Silicon Valley. It was audio only. Clubhouse. Yeah. So deep in the middle of COVID, when Clubhouse popped up for a minute, I had a wildly successful Clubhouse room. And by wildly successful, I mean, one time we had 12 people listening in. It was really, it was half a dozen mates, and we would get together every week and talk about stuff. And it turned out that this guy, who was a founder of a pretty successful company, had just been listening and obviously liked what he heard there. And so he then reached out after that. So I had no idea at the time, and had no idea until I was about 6 months in. So really serendipitous on that front. I threw it out to LinkedIn and to Twitter, which are my social media channels of choice. That's my poison. And that's really where the first clients came from, and still continue to come from.
It's interesting that you mentioned about offering your time for free to start off with. I guess a lot of senior marketing execs, or any person, any senior executive looking to come to this fractional world, they'll probably think it's a bit counterintuitive, because they've probably left a large 6-figure salary, the security of pensions, all of that remuneration and benefits. And then to come into this, you kind of expect, right, I'm going to start charging from day one. But would you really suggest that they do that kind of pro bono work to start off with, just to hone it before they start charging? Or is there kind of a balance?
Yeah, there's always a balance. At the end of the day, you have to do whatever you need to do to pay rent or the mortgage or look after the kids or whatever you need to survive. When I was doing that, I already had some paying clients. So I had, I think, 1 or 2 clients who had started. And so I was practicing in real time with those others as well. And even though my intent there was genuinely just to kind of hone the craft, pro bono clients that I had ended up being really good lead magnets. The people that I'd worked with had ended up referring quite a number of other clients who came in through the front door that way. And having been in the space now for a while, referrals, your number one source of leads is your network, and making sure you connect with those. The second is referrals, either from your clients or from other kind of fractionals in the space. So it's a really important way to kind of kick those off. And as you say, it's a balance of, can I afford to do this? Do I have the time? Am I busy driving Uber on the weekends to make it all go around? Everyone's got a different story.
And in terms of those early days of your fractional career, how did the business landscape, how did your clients embrace the model? Did you have to do a lot of explaining to say, look, it's not a consultancy gig?
100%. Yeah. Like the education and the advocacy and the awareness were a big part of what I was doing at the start, and still continue to do to this day. We'll come back around to it in a minute. But when I started throwing it out to social media, as well as a couple of clients, which is great validation, I also had a whole bunch of people reach out and they're like, hey, what's this fractional thing? And how does it work? And how do you find clients? And how do you know what to work on? And that was really the genesis for the Fractional Exec Community. That's how that started, because I didn't know the answers. I was just kind of bumbling along and figuring it out as I went along. So figured that it might be a good way to help answer some of those questions at scale. And so that was how we started, really, to kind of solve those operational questions. But yeah, 100%. Every conversation that I've had has started with a variant of, so what is this fractional thing? What is this fractional model, and how does that work? So I try to create some content on the site and on LinkedIn that kind of explain that, and I've written for some other organizations as well. Anything I can do to help get the word out and get the model out. I think, in Australia, it's gaining a little bit of traction. We're still very early days compared to more mature markets like the US. UK's, as always, are probably somewhere in the middle, is my guess from way over here. But there's still, we're still super early days and still a long way to go on that front.
And when you're educating the business landscape on the model and the benefits of the model, what is the biggest misconception by business leaders that you engage with about the fractional leadership model?
Yeah, totally. And I think every conversation I've had has started with that, what is a fractional and particularly how is it different from the consulting model? And the way that I view it, one of the key differences, at least for the work that I do, is I do 50% strategic and 50% operational. When I first kind of started doing independent work, even before it became fractional, I did a little bit of consulting, and it just didn't feel like a good fit, both for me and or for my clients. And now the space that I work in tends to be early stage, either tech companies or high growth companies. And so, there's not, consultants just aren't a good fit for that. They move too fast. You can't deliver something and then just hand over a 150-page PowerPoint deck and wish them well. God bless McKinsey and they make more money than I ever will. That's their superpower. But, it's just not a good fit for early stage companies. And so, my first instinct is to get in and build things. I hear about a problem. My first instinct is, great, let me write 100 slides on this. It's okay. Let's build a solution. And so, being hands-on, being inside the tent, I think is one of the key differences with consulting. And it's something that seems to resonate with clients as well. Once they realize that you're in there and you're a part of the leadership team, you're in the meetings, you've got an email address, you're in the systems building things, you're in HubSpot, whatever it is, then that seems to trigger a bit more of an understanding.
And I think that piece around integrating yourself as a fractional CMO or a fractional VP of Sales or fractional whatever, fractional leader in the business, that integration piece is really, really important. How do you go about integrating yourself in your clients? Because unlike a consultant, which is very much they go, they deliver, they go again. How do you integrate with your clients?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's really important because you have to get up to speed really, really quickly and start adding value kind of right away. And I think one of the big lessons for me over the last couple of years, both from my own hard-won experience, but also talking to people who've been in it for a lot longer, is to run to be very disciplined about running a very sharp workshop or diagnosis up front, so that you understand exactly what the plan is for let's say, at least for the next 3 months, and both agree what you're working on, have that documented, and then have, excellent communication on the way to say, this is what we're working on. And that kind of goes a long way to getting you embedded and getting you working on the things that are going to move the needle, things that make a difference. And that generally gets you to where the action is within the company.
And for you personally, Zach, how many clients do you have at the moment? How many days a month do you typically work with?
And it varies. Look, my average, I try not to take more than 3.5 days of booked client time per week, because I find that the context switching is just too much. And that may change a little bit. I've got a client at the moment that's 2 days a week, which is great. So you can, wallow in it a little bit more. It gives you the luxury of a bit more time. And then it just depends. I may have some other smaller bits and pieces floating around as well. Most of the fractionals that I know tend to do a variety of work. I think at the start I certainly was, no, I'm only going to do the, retainer-based monthly retainer gets you a day a week, that kind of thing. But as you kind of go forward, both as I think a land and expand strategy for proving your value to the client, whether it's a short workshop, 3 or 4 days, something defined like that, or a little bit of advisory work and then expanding from there, or really just rounding out the work that you're doing. I think most people that I know who've been around for a while tend to have a variety of, different shaped projects within the kind of fractional space.
That's interesting. I guess for listeners or viewers watching this, for those who are kind of thinking about the transition from a corporate, full-time corporate role, they're thinking about moving into this fractional work style, this portfolio career, they'll probably be thinking about, how do I divvy up my time? How do I charge my time? Do I go retainer? Do I charge by the day? Do I charge by the hour? How did you how did you land on what you do?
Yeah, the majority of my work is by retainer, and I wish I could tell you that was a result of some really sophisticated market analysis. But ultimately, it was, as I mentioned, I did some consulting work to start with, and I'm just not a good fit for that. I had scope creep, clients I'm paying till the end, I wildly under budgeted, and I come from a SaaS background, and I went, well, why don't you just pay me the same amount every month? And that way I know how many clients I need, and we'll figure out what to work on, because you're a startup and that's going to change, week to week, let alone month to month. And it turns out that their retainer model is, the predominant model within Fractional. What to charge? I literally just put a finger in the air, and I started with $5,000 a month and sold out at that. And so I moved it up to 6, and then I moved it up to 7. And then I started to get a little bit of pushback. So there was a little bit of test and learn there. There are more sophisticated models around there, but ultimately it's, what the client will pay. I know a lot of people in the community have got more sophisticated models with rush hours and rush time and additional, but I tend to play it pretty fast and loose on that front. I'm not clocking 6-minute increments. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not charging like one, unfortunately. So it's pretty, it's pretty directional. There's going to be weeks where I do more than the kind of 1 or 2 days a week, and sometimes that may be a shade under, but it all balances out.
How do you manage that discussion with the client and manage their expectations? Are they getting enough value from you, or are they getting too little value from you? How do you sort of manage that balance?
Yeah, look, that's really bang on, and I think it comes back to the expectation management we touched on before around, this is what we're going to work on. Generally, when you're bringing a fractional on, you're looking to have them do something that's pretty high powered. It's not just come in and run a meeting or come in and be in an extra seat at the table. It's really, we want you to deliver something that has real value. And so it's less, I think it's really less about, are you doing your 8 hours per week or whatever that is, 32 hours a month? It's, are you delivering on this project that you agreed that we would deliver on? And are you making tangible steps towards that? I've never had anyone say you're not spending enough time on the business. I've had the conversation where people thought I'm not performing in terms of delivering value, for sure, but that's never been a time-based conversation.
Is there a minimum size company where the model works really well, or would a startup with just a handful of people on board, would a fractional leader be suitable for a company like that, or does the company have to be a minimum level of turnover before the model really comes into its own?
I think it really depends on the function that the fractional is working on, as well as the type of work that you're bringing them in to do. So, for example, I work in kind of sales and go-to-market, and my core client has ended up to be, and again, this has been a process of trial and error. They've got some sales success, they've got some runs on the board, they may have an early team, but they haven't hired a sales leader, and so they're looking for someone to help boost out that, build a scalable, repeatable sales engine that can drive them to that next point. And that is partly because I work with early stage companies, and there's a really accessible, I think, value prop for companies early in the journey who are, I don't have the requirement or the money to fund a full-time or whatever that fractional exec is. Like, getting somebody in early is a real jumpstart on kind of getting to that next point. You're really providing time to the founders or the CEOs, because they'll figure it out. That's what founders do. But getting somebody in who has been there, done that, and got the scar tissue to prove it is just such a massive value unlock that I think it makes sense. Now, if you're talking about somebody like a CIO, somebody who works predominantly with larger stage companies, that's a very different use case, and they probably only work with enterprise scale companies.
Fantastic. And in terms of, if you're giving advice to a CEO who's considering introducing a fractional leader into their business, what advice would you give them? If this is a new concept, they've probably read about it or seen something on LinkedIn, and think, that sounds like a good option for our business. What advice would you give that CEO?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things here to look at. One of the things that I've noticed both with my clients and having talked to a couple of hundred people in this space is there's a lot more emphasis on the cultural or the person-to-person fit when hiring the fractional. And my working theory for that is, to be a fractional exec, you have to have 15 or 20 years experience. And so it's a given that you can do the job. You can do it. They're hiring you because you've done it before. And so that's almost like, that's hygiene, that's table stakes. And so then the question becomes, will I enjoy working with this person? Is this going to be a fun ride? And then the second one is one that we've touched on a couple of times there, about really being explicit and working together to figure out what it is that they're going to be working on, what they're going to deliver, what that looks like, what are the time frames, and having ideally a weekly catch up, at most fortnightly, where it's 30 minutes of, this is what I worked on last week, this is what I'm working on this week, and any blockers or anything you need from the company there. I've learned the hard way that if you let that slip, then expectations start to drift, and that's a valley of despair.
I guess for marketing professionals listening to this, or sales professionals, anyone looking to come into this fractional career, is there a minimum age where, if you're under, let's say 30, so you might have finished, you might have gone and done a degree somewhere, you've probably got 5 or 6 years under your belt in a discipline. And those people might think, actually, this fractional gig sounds like my kind of thing. But would you be suspicious if someone who was in their late 20s, early 30s came to market, positioned themselves as a fractional CMO or fractional salesperson? Would you be suspicious, or would you give them the sort of a chance?
Look, at the end of the day, whatever the market is happy to pay for, the market is happy to pay for, and there's no licensing requirements. I know that some people feel like there should be, but look, I would just have a look. I don't think there's any sort of specific age requirements. It's really about the work that you've done prior to launching as a fractional. And even within that, I've certainly done work now that has stretched me in the last couple of years, and I'm 100% a better operator now because of the variety of work and the type of work that I've done. So it doesn't mean you have to have completed it all prior to becoming a fractional, but ideally you're looking for, the underlying value prop of a fractional is somebody who's been there, done that, and can do it quickly or more effectively for you. And then it just really comes down to, are they, is it an exec? Is it somebody who's perhaps at a manager or a director level? And what does that look like? So
in terms of the leadership, the fractional leadership model, is it here to stay, in your opinion? Where is it going to be in 5 years' time?
Yeah, look, I think it is. It's really having a moment. And I saw the other day that there are now 120,000 people on LinkedIn calling themselves a fractional, which is up 118,000 since I started looking about 2.5 years ago. So it's definitely having a moment. And look, I think that, the gig economy for the C-suite, it just offers so much value. It may change in terms of how we find jobs. Nobody's cracked the demand side yet, and God willing, somebody will, because we're all waiting for it to happen. And what that looks like and how you get paid and what the model is may change, but that fundamental underlying value prop of getting somebody in who's been there and done that, and applying a senior resource in a much more targeted, flexible way, I don't think that's going anywhere.
And for a senior executive thinking about coming into this portfolio work style, if you were to go back and repeat your last few years, what advice would you give to anyone considering coming into this work style?
Yeah, I think, and I've had a lot of conversations about, how do we get people up to speed as quickly as possible? And my hope is that, through the Fractional Exec Community and other similar groups around the world like that, we can provide the tools and the training and really get people up to speed a lot quicker than my journey. I think learn from the other people who are out there. It's pretty easy to track down those resources now. Figure out what your niche is. Figure out what your value prop is for that niche. Get really, really so narrow that it feels really wildly uncomfortable, that it's way too small. Because what I found to be a truism is, even though you start super narrow, eventually it will widen. Your engagement will widen as broad as you allow it to be. And ultimately there will come a time where the question comes up, and they may phrase it a bit differently, but it's something like, "Hey, old guy, you've been here before. What should we do in this situation?" And whether that's, tech stack or recruitment or funding or whatever that looks like, it really comes back to that. So figure out what it is you're doing and really jump in with both feet. I think you really have to commit to it, at least until somebody comes along and particularly solves for the demand side. You really got to go hard at it and make sure that you are having a proper crack at it, because it is possible, it is doable, but it does take a lot of work.
I can totally concur. My own personal experience. It is a bloody hard slog. It's
Yeah.
It's not easy. And I think particularly marketers need to come into this with their eyes wide open, because even though you've been a marketer for 20, 30 years, you know marketing, it's your discipline, it's your skill set. It's very hard going from a CMO where you're predominantly a people leader and you spend most of your time leading people. When you come out of that corporate environment into this portfolio work style, you're starting from scratch. You've got to build your personal brand, you've got to build your value proposition. And whilst you may have the toolkit to build websites, do social media, do business development, you are at an advantage. It still takes time. And, it's taken me a good 12 months to start building traction. And I think I'm an okay marketer, but it does take time. So don't underestimate the amount of time it takes. And serendipity, if you're very lucky, you may have a client or you may have somebody in your network who's ready to buy from day one, but that's quite often a rare situation. Is that what you found?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. It is such a radically different proposition. And even, somebody who's been selling for a long time or marketing for a long time, it is such a radically different thing to be selling yourself and defining those services, and to not have a team. Particularly if you're used to working at a senior level at, an exec function, it's like, great, here's the high level. Okay, go and do that for me, team. And then you look around and realize that I am the team. Now I have to go and do that. And now I have to execute on that. And then ultimately when you get running, that balance between how do I keep the pipeline flowing and, I'm too busy to do pipe because I've got clients, and then your engagement finishes and you look around and, oh, where's my pipeline? Oh, I haven't published anything for 6 months because I've been too busy. Yeah, it's real.
And you touched on it earlier, and I think just before we end, Zach, it'd be great if you could tell the listeners a little bit about the Fractional Exec Community you've set up. Can you explain what that is, and for anyone listening who wants to join, what they need to do, where they can find it?
Yeah, totally. Look, we're a free community for anyone who's interested in the fractional exec space. And I mentioned before, we started out to help people move into that space, and that's still the primary function. We've built some how-to guides, some operational templates, some training and some pointers around that. We've got about 500 people. We are from all over the world. We're probably about 75% APAC at the moment, but people from UK and North America and Argentina and a few other Sweden. I think we've got a couple in Sweden. So yeah, check it out. It is a .com.au. It's thefractionalexec.com.au, but we certainly have people from all over the world. So jump on. Come and join us. We're all organized around a Slack group, and it's just an amazing group of really heavy hitters who have been incredibly generous with their time.
Fantastic. And what I'll do, Zach, I'll put the links to that in the podcast notes for people to follow. So, Zach, that's probably a good point to close the show. If you've been listening or watching this episode, I hope you found value from the discussion and you've been inspired by Zach's story there. In the next episode, I'll be speaking to a fractional leader from another part of the world, so stay tuned for that one. Zach, thank you again for giving up your time. I guess it's your evening, my morning over here, but thank you so much for sharing your perspectives. I've really enjoyed listening to your journey there, and I wish you the very best of luck with your future journey.
Thanks, Paul. That to sign off for the rest of the day, mate. Really appreciate it.